Welcome to an experiment in democracy. I'm Brian Lehrer, coming to you this hour from the CUNY Graduate Center in Midtown Manhattan at 34th and 5th, right across the street from the Empire State Building. We have a live audience here, several hundred people, and we're going to try to do two important things, two things that I think you'll find very interesting to listen to and, in a way, participate in as you listen. Number one is what we'll discuss, the best ways to keep our subways safe in an age of urban terrorism without trampling civil liberties. And number two is how we'll discuss it as an experiment in deliberative democracy. Here's how it'll work. We will poll our audience about their views on some of the MTA's new subway security programs and plans, the random searches, the 1,000 or so surveillance cameras they plan to install, the cell phone service they want to bring to platforms. We'll also find out their views on profiling. Then we'll present the audience with an array of guests, and at the end of the hour, we'll poll the audience again to see how the burden of actual information and other people's opinions changes their views. Now, you can participate, too, as you listen on the radio. All you've got to do is listen with an open mind rather than just looking for the person who agrees with you and cheering them on. Be the umpire, not the pitcher or the batter, as John Roberts has put it. And let's get right to it. I've asked one of our guests, Newsday's transit correspondent, Joshua Robin, to help me out here by helping me count hands. So are you ready to be an instant public opinion analyst?
Absolutely, Brian.
Okay, Josh, that's great. Now, your job is to tell us roughly what percentage of the audience answers yes to these questions, and you are also free to make any observations about who those people may be. Here we go. Who here knows that the MTA has actually begun random bag searches?
This is overwhelming, Brian. This is pretty much everyone.
That may be the last moment of unanimity today. Who here has actually been searched?
Brian, we have a handful, perhaps 10 folks of the several hundred that are here.
Who here tends to support the random search program in its current form as you understand it? Josh, what do you see?
It's probably about a third, I would say, of the people here,
That's
maybe a little bit
I
more.
would say too. And among those of you who have actually been searched, although that wasn't many people, did the experience of being searched make you more supportive, less supportive, or did it have basically no effect? More supportive? Nobody?
One. We have one gentleman over here.
Less supportive?
We have about 5 or so.
And no effect if you've actually been searched? Also no effect. Why? Let's bring a microphone over. Since there were a few people who became less supportive as a result of being searched, I wonder if we can get one of those folks on mic and get a quick, very, very quick response. If you could put up your hand so the microphone can find you. If you would like to say why it negatively influenced your opinion. There's somebody all the way in the back. Tell us why. What happened on that search that turned you off to the idea?
Not necessarily turned me off. It just had no effect. It happens all the time, you know. Been happening.
Been happening, you mean even before this new program?
Yeah, since high school.
This is a riding while black violation that you're referring to? All right, we have somebody on another mic?
Hi. I was searched heading to Central Park, and I had my bag with my Frisbee and my towel and some drinks with me to take to the park. And the reason that I was less supportive after the searches is because it seemed completely ineffective. If someone wanted to bring a bomb or something else that they would detonate on the train, they probably wouldn't use a Midtown stop. They'd probably use a stop somewhere that was outside of Midtown. Plus, I think most police officers that looked at me carrying my Frisbees and stuff would not have thought that I had a bomb.
All right. You anticipate, and thank you for speaking up, you anticipated my next question, which is who here thinks the searches in their current form will provide meaningful protection from a terrorist attack? In other words, who thinks that they will work? Whoa.
Not many people, Brian.
1, 2, yeah, about as many people as think the Devil Rays will win the pennant. So I'm not sure I get why a third of you supported the searches while almost none of you think they will work. Is there anybody who's willing to say why you support them if you don't think that they'll be effective? This gentleman right over here.
The biggest problem is there should be an additional police officer there, and if somebody comes down the stairs and sees somebody shouting up something and turns around and hightails it back up the stairs, there should be someone upstairs grabbing that person and say, "Why are you running away? What's inside that bag?" Then you have a reason for reasonable search, and somebody was trying to bring something on that system that they shouldn't have been on bringing it onto that system.
Okay, so you think it would work better if it was behavior-based, basically, right?
Right.
But you didn't support it originally when you raised your hand.
I did
right?
support it. I did support it because it's better. What we have is better than nothing, but there's still a lot of problems, and the system is not as good as it could be.
So does better than nothing sum up? Does better than nothing sum up why many of you raised your hands before, even though you don't think it will be effective? Yeah, a lot of yeses.
People are definitely nodding.
Okay, better than nothing is not the highest ringing endorsement for a public policy, but I guess it's better than nothing. Who here is concerned that the subway searches will do too much to damage our civil liberties?
About 2/3, Brian. A couple of yeahs in the background.
The MTA and police, well, who here doesn't think it will damage our civil liberties in an unacceptable way or to an unacceptable degree?
Don't you know what the Fourth Amendment stands for?
All right, the MTA and Police Commissioner Kelly emphasized that these are random searches to avoid profiling, both to comply with the law and because they say profiling is wrong. But the ACLU says this will inevitably become a form of profiling, regardless of any good intentions. Who agrees with the ACLU that profiling will inevitably result?
I'd say a little bit more than half, Brian.
And some people think we should be profiling, that subway bombers are so likely to be young Muslim men of Middle Eastern or South Asian background that people who appear to fit that category should be given more scrutiny, and that it's folly not to. Who here agrees with that statement?
Say about a fifth. Say about a fifth, Brian.
Okay, so on the major questions, we have about a third who support the random searches, about as implemented, very few who've actually been searched, almost nobody who thinks the searches are likely to be effective in their current form, about half who think they'll diminish our civil liberties, maybe 20% who think profiling is a good thing. And now we will burden you with information, and we will poll you again later in the hour. First, we will continue with Newsday's transit reporter Joshua Robin for a few minutes. He's been on the phone today with the NYPD, trying to get some basic official stats about the random search program so far. The program began in July after the London bombings, really right after the attempted bombings 2 weeks after the July 7th attacks. And have they given you any statistics, Josh, about how many people have actually been searched?
No, they haven't, and that's not surprising because they refused to also give it to the New York Civil Liberties Union, who's asked for that same information in a lawsuit. And they say that it would be it would provide terrorists with opportunities of how many times you can go in and how many times you'll be searched.
What's the percentage of riders and the method of searching? And is it the same from station to station and rider to rider, will they say?
No, it's usually about 1 in 10, every 10th rider or so will come in, but they're deliberately vague about it because also they don't want to clue in people as to how many times you can come in. You can just wait and see, this person's been searched, I'll come in right afterwards. But it's usually about 1 in 10, and they'll mix up the stations. They don't announce it beforehand. The only indication that you'll have is when you come downstairs and you'll see a table set up and usually 2 uniformed police officers with a sign that'll say something to the effect of, your bags might be searched, NYPD.
Have they made any arrests?
No, not that has been indicated at all. And there certainly hasn't been any arrests that they've announced for counterterrorism, finding someone, say, who's come in with a bomb.
Are there any objective ways? No arrests of any kind as a result of this?
There have not been any public reports of arrests of any kind. That's not to say that it hasn't happened. There hasn't been any release of information that are directly related to these subway searches.
Would they be required to release that information if such arrests had taken place?
I would think so. I don't see how they would be able to hold that information back.
Do they say, and you heard all the skepticism about how effective this program will be, do they say they have any measurable ways of saying this is effective, this is worth the money and the resources?
They believe that. It's still quite early to say whether it is effective. It has been going on now for only a couple of months, but they stand by it, and the mayor points to the fact that, or could point to the fact that a poll of New Yorkers found that 2/3 of New Yorkers believe that it is a good way to prevent terrorism attacks, something that they're willing to put up with at the very least.
How many official complaints have there been from riders about how they've been treated?
Unclear at this point, but it's worth noting that the lawsuit filed by the ACLU has a lot of support among people, and of course I'm sure people in your audience also feel the same way. People feel that this is an infringement. It's basically like being searched walking on the street. I mean, the subway is something that people need to go on. It's our means of transportation within the city, and it's a public place that's funded by tax dollars, and that's really an unalienable right of New Yorkers to have. So people are quite upset about it. At the same time, a majority of New Yorkers, of those surveyed, do support it.
And no complaints that you know of that profiling is taking place, in fact, even if it's officially banned, or do you?
I don't know of any specific complaints of profiling. That's not to say that it hasn't happened. That information has not emerged yet.
All right. Let's bring in our other panelists. And Joshua Robin, thank you very much for helping to get us started here. We're going to bring you back at the end of the hour to help measure how people's views have changed in the audience. Joining me now with more information and their points of view are Sohail Muhammad, a New Jersey-based immigration attorney, David Harris, author of the book Profiles and Injustice, Why Racial Profiling Cannot Work. He also wrote an op-ed piece this summer called Targeting Muslim Men Does Not Work. He teaches law and values at the University of Toledo Law School. Heather McDonald, a John Olin Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, the New York-based conservative think tank. Among her writings is an article in National Review this summer called Looking the Wrong Way, New York City's New Search Policy is a Waste. Stephen Ellman, law professor and associate dean at New York Law School. He's also on the advisory committee of Human Rights Watch, specializing mostly in South Africa. And thank you all for taking part in this event. You know, I was going to raise the civil liberties question first, but I'm so struck by the reaction to the audience about the effectiveness that I wonder if anybody has any comments on that. It's certainly been a criticism of the random search program in theory, that it's a waste of money and police resources, and with the risks to our civil liberties, because there are hundreds of subway stations and you can only set up searches at a small number a day. So I wonder if anyone wants to speak up from the panel on how this will actually stop anyone organized enough to stage the suicide attack, profiling or no profiling. David Harris?
Brian, it's a real issue. Effectiveness is the key to safety. Everybody knows that. And let's not deceive ourselves. We have real enemies in this world. Anybody who tells you differently is looking through rose-colored glasses, to say the least. So what we have to do is be as effective as we can. Now, the way you do that is by using behavioral observation and by collecting and using intelligence. Those are the two key factors to detecting terrorism, to stopping it before it can injure and kill people and destroy property. Now, if you're going to focus on behavior, the problem with using racial or ethnic appearance is that those considerations, even used among others, even as one factor among many, take the attention of law enforcement off of what they must watch most carefully, which is behavior. We don't actually care if people look South Asian or look Arab when there's an inclination to profile. We think that those are important clues because they tell us who is likely to behave as a terrorist. It is much better to move to the behaviors themselves. So that's what we really care about. We don't actually care if the terrorist looks one way or the other. We want to stop terrorist behavior.
We have to take our first break of the hour, then we'll continue on effectiveness, civil liberties, and much more. Brian Lehrer on WNYC.
We're at the hospital. We're going to take you on the ambulance.
I had a heart attack when I was 48.
You're gonna be okay.
48-year-old female.
I survived, but I'll always be at risk for another.
What do you got?
I think she's having a heart attack.
Let's get
And
her
my
in
heart
bed.
may never be the same.
2, 3.
Heart disease is the #1 killer of women.
Now I'm taking steps to lower my risk. But I wish I'd done it earlier, for myself and for my family.
The Heart Truth starts with you. Find out your risk and take action to lower it.
Sure, my neighbors Jean and Louise, they may be superheroes with superpowers, but that doesn't make them so super at saving energy and money. I mean, I like them and all, but when Jean uses that power vision to cook dinner,
Honey.
or when Louise or Starbright tries to save a little on the lighting bill.
Mom, a little light.
I may not be able to harness the power of the elements, but I save significant cash and help the environment with appliances, electronics, and windows featuring the Energy Star label. And I improved my home energy efficiency with insulation. My thermostat? Watch this. I'm just kidding. It's programmable. I don't have to lift a finger to save on AC and heating.
Mom, Dad's making fondue again.
So discover your own energy-saving superpowers. Go to ase.org/consumers.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC from the CUNY Graduate Center at 34th and 5th with our deliberative democracy experiment, subway security, our random searches, surveillance cameras, and cell phones, what New York needs. We polled our live audience on some of their views, and we're presenting them with information and opinions to see how they affect them. With Sohail Mohammed, a New Jersey-based immigration attorney, David Harris, author of the book Profiles in Injustice, Why Racial Profiling Cannot Work, Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute, Stephen Ellman, law professor and associate dean at New York Law School, and let's continue. Heather McDonald, you wrote in National Review that the disconnect between what we know and what we do remains stunning to behold. What do we know and what do we do?
Well, I agree with Mr. Harris that anti-terrorism efforts should be informed by everything that we know and can find out about Islamic terrorism. And I think the first thing we should start with is what Osama bin Laden has told us about Islamic terrorism. He issued a fatwa in 1998 calling upon all Muslims to kill Americans wherever they can find us. To me, the problem with the current policy is its randomness. That is deliberately ignoring the fact that Osama bin Laden is the culprit of the profiler. He has not called on Jews, he has not called on Catholics to kill Americans. To look for Islamic terrorists randomly, I think, is a deliberately stupid policy. I do not think that there should be targeting based on apparent Muslim identity. I think I agree with David that it should be behavioral based, but I think that officers should be given the discretion to take into account somebody's apparent national identity in determining whether behavior is suspicious.
I want to follow up on that in just a second, but I'm just curious, do you think that even if we do it your way, that we can really prevent a determined suicide bomber in New York with random searches at X stations per day and over 400 stations in the system?
Well, presumably they will make a calculation as to what are their chances for getting caught. But let me just add that I think I would ask your audience to think about whether we would accept the FBI in a Klan investigation if a church had been burned in the South, going about a policy of random investigation to make sure that in the course of investigating the criminals who did this, that blacks were also investigated, which is basically what our random check is all about. We want to make sure that in looking for Islamic terrorists, we are definitely going to be looking at non-Muslims. To me, it would be a waste of resources for the FBI to deliberately program in a certain percentage of blacks to avoid charges of profiling in doing a Klan investigation as it would be to deliberately program in a certain number of Jews and Catholics in doing preventive Islamic terror work.
Before I go back to David Harris for a reaction to that, very briefly, how would you profile? How would you have the police actually do something differently at subway stations?
I'm reluctant to use the term profiling. I think that the police should be given the discretion to notice, say, if there are 5 seemingly South Asian men bringing packages onto a subway, without fearing that they will be sued by the ACLU. Again, this is not nefarious. It is taking Osama bin Laden at his word. Where this really comes into play, I think, is the fear of lawsuits, that the ACLU will get its hands on data after the fact, and if it turns out that more Muslim men than others have been searched, that will trigger a disparate impact lawsuit. And I don't think, as I say, that it should be an assumption that every Muslim should be searched. Obviously not. That would be insane.
Okay.
But I do believe that the police should be given the ability to take that into account as one factor.
So, David Harris, you think this is not only wrong, but that it would be counterproductive?
Yes, I think it would be counterproductive because when you factor race in, even as only one factor among others, what you do is you distract the attention of your security service, your law enforcement people, from what really counts, and they become less accurate. When we see race, and all human beings see it all the time, it's deep in the wiring, when we see that, we tend to overvalue it as a clue to who is dangerous. The other problem with it is impossible to identify somebody as looking Muslim. It is impossible. The Muslim world goes from Spain and Morocco all the way through Indonesia and Malaysia. There are a whole group of human appearances. You cannot dependably identify Muslims. I live in a town with a large Muslim population. Some are blue-eyed and blonde-haired. Some people from the Middle East in my town who would fit the description that you would think of when you think Muslim are not Muslim. Random searches are not enough by themselves. They are an important component of a security system because they deprive the terrorist of the ability to use an unwitting person, and they deter the terrorist because the terrorist knows they could end up as that 1 out of 10 people. But I do not think we should assume that that's the only thing going on in the subway. Just because that's all the police department has announced, they are undoubtedly watching behavior. That's the real gist of it, and they've got a police presence in all those subway stations right near if anything should go wrong.
Now, David, one could argue that if you look at the people who've been identified as responsible for the 9/11 attacks,
yes,
the Madrid bombings, as far as we know, the London bombings, as far as we know, the Bali bombings, as far as we know, they would fit the rough visual profile and background profile that Heather was describing.
Absolutely.
So if you accept that, then how does your method make us safer than her method?
Because if you use visual clues like that, what you will do is you will not look for what really counts, which is behavior by terrorists. Dangerous behavior is what you have to focus on, whether the terrorist looks one way or the other. If you focus on visual clues, you will include lots and lots of people in your security checks, and they will be false positives. That will overload your system. It will waste your resources. The only way to make this work, and the Israelis know this, these are the people who really have experience in this, is to focus like a laser beam on terrorist behavior and to gather intelligence and use it wisely.
Stephen Ellman, you have a kind of middle ground on this, I understand. I gather you do not support subway profiling right now, but might in an emergency, and that you do support more profiling at airports. Do I have that right?
Yes. Right now, it seems to me what we've got is a program that's simply ineffectual. I don't think that doing a little bit of searching here and there is likely to seriously check terrorists, and meanwhile, I think it is a significant blow to constitutional rights. Now, so what could you do about that? Well, one possibility is you could go from a little bit of random searching to a little bit of profiled searching. I am against that at this moment. I wouldn't necessarily be against it if we were in a terrorist emergency, if we had something telling us seriously, credibly, that tomorrow there was going to be a bombing on the subways. Well, that would change everything for me. I think actually that airplanes are something like an analogy to emergencies, but I want to stay away from airplanes for a moment just to say that if we were in a terrorist emergency, I just don't think that it is clear from the studies that profiling really would be useless. I agree with David Harris that race distracts us all the time, but in his very perceptive book, he cites one study from Maryland where the state troopers were searching vastly more black motorists than white motorists. But in this particular situation, perhaps because they only searched after they'd done some initial screening after a stop, the fact is that of this grossly disproportionate number of black people searched, almost exactly the same number were found with contraband. It's hard not to think that in that instance, the profiling might have been working. I don't think we know profiling doesn't work. I don't think we can rule it out on efficacy if the stakes are as high as an emergency.
So, for example, after the London subway bombings, you would have labeled that a terrorism emergency and supported profiling for some period of time after July 7th?
In London, I would have. I think they definitely were in a continuing terrorist emergency. In New York, I'm not convinced we were. No.
What's the difference?
I think I do agree very much with David Harris that our protection here depends on knowing as much as we can. It seems to me that all that we in New York knew, perhaps the law enforcement people knew more than I do, but all that we in the public knew was that an awful thing had happened in London. That's just not the same as saying there's a terrorist emergency in New York. We're in terrorist threat all the time, every day. If we say that that equals a terrorist emergency, bingo, we really have no liberties left. That I'm very much against. What I'm also against is denying that there are some things that really are emergencies and that the rules change then.
But you consider airplanes and airports in kind of a permanent terrorist emergency or something equivalent to a terrorist emergency?
Yeah, I've thought some about airports in the context of subways. I do think that the horrendous capacities of guided airplanes as missiles make them somewhat different from almost everything else, although bitter experience is teaching us that there are more awful things around. But I think there are a lot of differences between airports and subways. I don't want to go on too long with your airtime, but the crucial point, I think, is that subways are basically the next thing to streets. Airports are a very different context. You can impose on people a little more in a context where everybody is already being searched a little without doing, it seems to me, anything like the kind of civil liberties damage that you would do if you start searching Muslim men everywhere.
This is WNYC. It's our deliberative democracy experiment, Subway Security, our random searches, surveillance cameras, and cell phones, what New York needs. Sohail Mohammed, New Jersey-based immigration attorney. You come at this more from the standpoint, I think, of the rights of those who would be profiled. What do you think their rights should be?
Basically, the Constitution says the constitutional right is the same for all people. That's what our Constitution says. They're asking nothing more, nothing less. The Fourth Amendment basically says that individuals are protected from unreasonable search and seizures. But what we need to do, Brian, is when you look at the rights, we have to say we're trying to balance security versus the individual liberties. Look at the initiative that this government, this administration has taken since 9/11. Two of the programs that I have been intimately involved in the immigration side. Number one, there was a registration program that required, I think we did a program 2 years ago, National Exit Entry and Series Registration Form. 24 out of the 25 countries were basically Muslim countries. We rounded up a lot of people, we fingerprinted them, we took background information, it's more than surveillance. We actually had people that were brought in. Did we find one link to a terrorism? Absolutely not. And this is such a failed program. I have a client who went this August to voluntarily register, because he was asked to register, and he went in for registration, there was a sign by the INS office that says, come back in September, we're closed. This is what we're doing. It's a full-time Dodge terrorism, and you're going to tell the terrorists, come back in September. He goes in September. He goes in September. He's told, we don't have your file, go home. And this is the failed system that we have. We rounded up about 2,000, that the Department of Justice admits, we rounded about 2,000 immigrants. Did we find one individual from this rounding up that we had? These are window dressing. We should move away from public relations security systems to real policing. Policing is what we need, not profiling.
So Hal Mohammed, Heather McDonald was arguing that the current random search program is likely to be ineffective because it ties the hands of the police too much in this respect. Do you support the searches in their current form?
No, I don't support the searches in their current form because as the ACLU has filed a lawsuit, I'd give, this would be a discussion in your second panel, but look at the profiling where it was used. It's outlawed. The federal government had a mandate. Professor Harris did a very good job in his book. New Jersey, it was outlawed because the government debated it and said that this does not work. New York, it's illegal to profile. So you have states that are outlawing profiling, and we have somebody on this panel who says profiling. Again, if we want to know that we're doing something, yes, those are really good things. It makes you feel really good. But you know what? In your heart, you know it's not buying security. It's just a window dressing.
So you think that the officially random subway searches will inevitably devolve into profiling?
Of course it does. And you tell me if it's a random number fifth, every fifth person you're going to do, and number six happens to be terrorists. You say, oh, you come back, take a number 5 so that I can search you. You're not going to do that. You want what Professor Harris has said, behavioral. That's the focus you have to have, not just some random number or some randomness that you have. Security should not be, if my 100-year-old grandmother is acting suspiciously, I want her to be searched. Yes, I want her to be searched. But don't do this to my 2-year-old, please.
Heather McDonald, do you want to respond?
Well, first of all, I have never advocated racial profiling in a domestic law enforcement context. My argument has been a different one about the validity of the studies that purport to show that it's going on. But I literally do not understand what it would mean to assume that you can be an Islamic terrorist and not Muslim. We're talking about a very different problem between looking for robbers or drug dealers in this country and looking for Islamic terrorists. As far as I'm concerned,
how do you know a Muslim when you see one?
Well, then you do have to start making certain generalizations about the geographic belt from which the overwhelming majority of Al-Qaeda members have come from. Is this a perfect generalization? No. Any generalization is going to be both under and over-inclusive. That's why the consequences of using this generalization are not throwing somebody in jail. They're not indicting them. It is a possibly elevated level of scrutiny.
In London, a Brazilian man was shot and killed by police, apparently in part because of mistaken profiling such as that. Is that consequence acceptable?
Of course not. That is a completely tragic event, but there was a lot more that happened between the possible identity of that man as Muslim and him being shot. I think that's very unfair to say that allowing the police to use apparent South Asian or North African identity in deciding who to scrutinize more heavily means that you can thereby shoot them.
Who wants to respond? David Harris.
Of course, nobody favors an outcome like the Brazilian man, and nobody favored outcomes like we had in New York in the late 1990s. I think what we have to focus on here is what will work. Listening to Heather's last answer, I had to agree with her. It would be a generalization that you would have to make. And she's right, it would not be a perfect generalization. My argument is that it is so imperfect that it would be worse than useless. It would actually harm our ability to find what's important. You use behavioral profiling, you're looking at completely different things. You're looking at weapons-related behavior, you're looking at physiological behaviors, and you're looking at strategic behaviors. This is already in use. It's being used in Logan Airport in Boston. People can be trained in it. It has been used in Israel for years. It works. So if there is that deep a flaw in the generalizations that have to be made for the assumptions of profiling to come together, why use it in preference to the policies that we know, the practices that we know actually do work, and that's looking at behavior, that's focusing on intelligence. You do those things, and you avoid the problems that profiling inevitably brings to the fore.
We will continue in 1 minute with our deliberative democracy experiment, subway security, our random searches, surveillance cameras, and cell phones. What New York needs. Stay tuned.
And so we arrived. We didn't ask to be here. Let's say it just happened. But now we're here, a word in your ear. We don't want your sympathy. We're stronger than you think. We don't want your tears. We have a river of our own. We can do without cynicism, indifference, and abuse. We're not the problem. We're the solution. We'll soon be the future. But right now we are the present. And in truth, we want for only one thing, your consideration. We're children. Don't treat us like kids. You were once us. Give us the chance to become you.
This is a story about the living reef, the oldest city on Earth. These wondrous, complex communities are the most diverse places on the planet and are so important that the ocean cannot exist without them. And we cannot exist without the oceans. Unfortunately, pollution and overfishing are destroying the world's coral reefs. We've already lost 25%, and the rest may perish within a generation, unless we act now. Protect the living reef, and we protect the ocean. Protect the ocean, and we protect ourselves.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC with our deliberative democracy experiment, subway security, our random searches, surveillance cameras, and cell phones, what New York needs. We polled our live audience on some of their views, and we're presenting them with information and opinion to see how it affects them. In a few minutes, we will return to the audience and re-poll them again and see how they've moved, if at all, and what they think they've learned from all of this. But I want to do two other things real quick with our panelists first. One is, something I always like to do in a debate situation is to look for common ground or uncertainties people have about their own positions. So I wonder if anybody wants to jump in on where you think you might agree with each other. Do you think you share any values or any ideas on how to protect mass transit? Any volunteers?
I think we all want people to be safe. We all want that. We disagree about how that is to be done, and we want to do it while we preserve what is best about our society and our country and our Constitution. I don't think anybody up here would argue about that. I think what terrorism brings to us, the real challenge of terrorism, beyond the actual horrific acts themselves, are how we meet that particular question, that particular dilemma. There are no easy answers, but I would ask that people think, that we not grab the first solution that feels right, because it's often not the right one.
And by the way, our guests, who I haven't identified in a while, are David Harris, who was just speaking, author of the book Profiles and Injustice, Why Racial Profiling Cannot Work. He's from the University of Toledo Law School. Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute. Among her writings, an article in National Review this summer called Looking the Wrong Way, New York City's New Search Policy is a Waste. Sohail Mohammed, New Jersey-based immigration attorney, and Stephen Ellman, law professor and associate dean at New York Law School. And Dean Ellman, you were going to say something about common ground?
Well, I don't know if it's common ground, but it seems to me that we have not really talked about universal steps of the sort that are routinely taken at airports. That is, the baggage search now is hit and miss at best. But perhaps it would be appropriate to have, if we could, radiation detectors at every subway stop. If such things exist, biohazard detectors at every subway stop. Metal detectors get a lot harder. You can certainly have them, but then you're into detaining the entire population while they go through. But I wonder whether we are actually, whether what we oppose is, if we do, is the randomness and dubiousness of this particular search program, where we might be more willing to accept some universal search programs in the same spots.
So, Sohail Mohammed, why do you think people come out so different on this issue? Is it based on experience, or what interests or constituencies you each represent? You all probably would say you share the underlying values of protecting the safety of people and protecting individual rights.
Yes, Brian, this issue, this whole debate about security and civil liberties, obviously you have both sides fighting for the same concept or same issue. The reason we are on different sides is we all want security. That's something we all agree on. So we want security, but at what cost? Does our Constitution basically say we trump our Constitution? Is Ms. McDonald going to take the position that, sure, we can suspend Fourth Amendment or certain provisions of the Constitution for the people that she has outlined or listed? Is that what we're proposing? Then it would be an easy job for us to say, well, for them the Constitution does not apply, so let's not even change any laws because the Constitution does not apply. We're not seeing this on this debate, but the underlying reasoning is somehow folks with a Muslim background or certain other groups don't deserve to have the same rights as others. That is wrong. That is morally unacceptable.
Dean Ellman, I'm going to go back to you, because you support, he was singling out Heather, but you also support profiling in some instances, and I presume you don't agree with his presumption that it's because you don't think Muslims have the same rights.
I certainly think Muslims have the same rights, but the rights that they and the rest of us have under the Fourth Amendment, somebody quoted it earlier here, are to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures. So the question, the constitutional question is, what's an unreasonable search and seizure? Or if we put it under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, we have a right, all of us, to be free of the denial of equal protection of the laws on the basis of race. But what's the equal protection of the laws? The general answer to that is that that the government can never discriminate on the basis of race. That's not our law. Our law is that the government can discriminate, but only if doing so is narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling state interest. So that just states the question. The interest here is pretty compelling. So is profiling or baggage searching, are these things sufficiently narrowly tailored? I'm arguing against those in this particular context, but it's no denial of the Constitution's reach to say that maybe there's a different answer in the particular circumstances that we face.
And give us a little background on the law here. One of the reasons that the NYPD says it is not profiling is because the courts have held it to be unconstitutional. Now we have two law professors and an attorney here. What is the law regarding profiling as you understand it, and is this whole debate just academic because the law is so clear and so limiting? Would we need a constitutional amendment to do what Heather McDonald and potentially Stephen Ellman wants to do? David Harris?
The law isn't as clear as it sounds. The state, through the police, cannot discriminate on the basis of race as such, but the courts have allowed police a great deal of latitude in selecting people for enforcement even in situations in which racial and ethnic characteristics are among the reasons that police are interested in them, and in some cases, when it's the only reason. The Supreme Court has actually permitted that. So I think there's maybe a misleading feeling that any time the police should do that, that they would get immediately sued, it would all be illegal. That's really, it's far less than clear. The other thing that we have to remember is that having a right under the Constitution or the law is only stage one. You have to enforce it, and that takes somebody to stand up, file a suit, whatever it takes. And that's a lot more difficult than it sounds, and then you have to win it in addition. That is not an easy thing to do when you're suing a public institution. So I think we're making a mistake if we think that the NYPD or other organizations are simply going to cower in the face of a lawsuit. I don't see that. I don't think it's been the past experience that police departments have done that.
Anyone else briefly on the law?
Well, I mean, let's remember that the Supreme Court has upheld the use of race and ethnicity in college admissions, and my guess is a considerable portion of the people in this room would support that. I would argue that taking Osama bin Laden at his word when he calls on Muslims and Muslims only to kill Americans is as compelling a state interest, and preventing terrorism is as compelling a state interest as achieving racial diversity on college campuses.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC with our deliberative democracy experiment. Subway security, our random searches, surveillance cameras, and cell phones, what New York needs. We've polled our live audience on some of their views, and we're presenting them with information and opinion to see how it affects them. And we're just about ready to go back to the audience and re-poll. But first, I wonder if there are any questions for our guests. No speeches, no grandstanding, just questions to help you understand any of their opinions or information better at this point. So we'll get a microphone right up to somebody up there, and let's go to that person right over there.
Hi, I had a question for Mr. Harris. I was wondering if we use this behavior-based profiling that you're talking about, if we found later that, and it fits specifically your definition of behavior-based profiling, if we found later that more Muslim men were searched, would you think that the ACLU had the right to file a lawsuit against the NYPD?
It's a good question. The ACLU can file a lawsuit at its discretion, let's say. I'm not sure that it would be appropriate, and I think they'd have a very difficult time winning it. What you're talking about is basically an impact-based lawsuit, not discrimination based on what people think up front, but how it affects people on the back end as implemented. That's a very, very difficult kind of lawsuit to win. I think if the police department could show that it was truly focused on behavior, that its policies were about behavior, that its training was about behavior, as they have done at Logan, the police department would win that lawsuit.
Someone over here. Oh, it's the woman with the microphone.
Excuse me. I don't know if you know about the Southern Poverty Law Center. They issue a intelligence report 2-3 times a year. And there's something like 750 hate groups in this country. And they're all colors, all backgrounds. And Timothy McVeigh was not a Middle Eastern man. And in Japan, the people who attacked the subway there were not Middle Eastern men, they were Japanese, in the Japanese society. So how do you discriminate about this?
Are we looking for Japanese terrorists or Islamic terrorists? Right now, the focus is on Islamic terrorism. And to get back to David's point, I think it's not mutually exclusive. I disagree that law enforcement is so stupid that it cannot both look at behavior and notice somebody's national origin. Behavior is a generalization as well. That is also both over and under inclusive. Not everybody sweating or carrying big bags or a backpack is a terrorist. So you're also going to be overstopping certain people and probably also understopping. So the large generalization about generalizations, that only behavioral generalizations are accurate, is untrue. So my point is only, I think the police should be able to notice if there are, for instance, 5 men who appear to be from the Middle East buying large quantities of fertilizer outside of Las Vegas. They should be able to notice that in a way that, if they were Mormon missionaries, may not be as relevant to an Islamic terror investigation.
Let me go to the gentleman over here who said, I believe, that he wanted to tell us something about how the searches are actually being conducted in the subways, that he had some information on that. Do we have that man? Who is that? Okay. Give him the microphone right there.
Yeah, hi, Brian. I've actually been on your show in the past as a reporter, and I've done some shoe leather reporting on this. When they first did this, which Ray Kelly said was triggered by the London bombings, he wanted to do this for a while. It was supposed to be voluntary. You were allowed to leave the subway station, walk away. At LaGuardia Airport, there's a hedge. As a driver, you turn, you do not see this. Cops are hidden behind the hedge. There's no way to get out. Cops told me they would detain people rather than let them not be searched. On the Long Island Railroad, after the doors are closed, there are announcements. You are subject to search. By the way, parenthetically, the MTA cops at Penn Station are making notations on the sort of people that they do search, i.e. White men in his 50s, etc. There was a call for data before. That's at Penn Station. So we're seeing an escalation. Finally, at NFL football games this weekend, there are pat-downs. Anybody who wants to go in.
On the subway part of that, how do you know?
The 3 facts I spoke of, I've observed. I believe the thing at both the Long Island Railroad and LaGuardia are significant escalations.
Let us now turn back to the audience as we reach the end of the hour or approach it in our deliberative democracy event and see what you've heard that's affected you. So we will call Joshua Robin, Newsday Transit reporter, back up to help count hands again, and I'll repeat the same core questions we asked at the beginning of the hour. According to our first poll, almost nobody thought the searches are likely to be effective in their current form. Has anybody changed on that? Now it's absolutely nobody. There might have been one or two.
There's actually
before.
one person in the background.
Who has changed? And do we want to hear briefly how? Meanwhile, I'll ask the next question. How many now think, well, who has a qualitative statement that you'd like to make? Something that you have heard this hour that has affected you. Can we get a microphone on this side? Down here, this man near the front has his hand up. The woman over there has her hand up.
I was in London during July where the bombings took place in the underground, 2 blocks from the Aldgate station. It was pretty unnerving. I'd like to point out, I agree with a lot that the panel has said. Dean Ellman, I agree with you except for one small thing. Every attack has come at a time of complacency. There is no advance warning. There wasn't 9/11. There wasn't in the London Underground.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me ask if anybody else has heard any information that's affected their views and changed you in any way during this hour. Up there.
David Harris said that the Israelis have been doing it in a particularly good way, but I think that's a good example of how, in many ways, you cannot actually ever prevent terrorism, even if you arm the state and you have checkpoints everywhere and you have CCTVs. And my question to the panel really is that, are we not just scaring ourselves to death? Are we not creating a situation where we're reorganizing our lives and actually doing the very thing that we're saying that we don't want to have? If we get a fear-driven panic about terror and terrorism, we're actually reorganizing our lives around a few nihilists, and that's the real problem I think we have to face.
Thank you. Does anybody here think that ethnic or religious or related profiling or further attention by law enforcement to who people are, such as the example of Muslim-looking men buying large quantities of fertilizer as opposed to apparently Amish people, has anybody changed more toward that point of view after hearing this evening? Has anybody here changed more away from that point of view?
Just a few people.
Very few people have changed. So, as a deliberative democracy event, perhaps not many minds have been changed, but we put a lot of information on the table. And coming up in part 2, which will air Thursday at this time, we will talk about surveillance cameras and cell phones in some issues that may not be so black and white, and I have a feeling there'll be more deliberation at that time. This hour was produced by Jim Colgan and Lisa Allison, with Ilya Merritt, Priya George, Daniel McDermott, Kate Hines, and senior producer Nuala McGovern. Help from Maria Galvez-Pantinen and Marta Castang. Our engineers, Edward Haber, Jennifer Munson, and David Schneerman. Special thanks to the Donald and Paula Smith Family Foundation for their support of this event. Additional thanks to Robin Billenkoff, John Chianese, Stephanie Hill-Wilchford, Ann Kite, Olivia Kisson, Aaron Russell, Brenda Williams-Butts, and the WNYC event volunteers. I'm Brian Lehrer.